Hi, and welcome to Deep Leadership. I'm your host, John Rennie. Today, we're talking about change. Now, change is constant, but most leaders still struggle to talk about it. Now, in this episode, I'm joined by Joel Ellis, a veteran business leader and coach who's on a mission to help managers communicate better during times of change. If you've ever launched a product, led a team through uncertainty, or just needed your message to land the first time, you need to hear this important conversation. Joel shares hard-won wisdom on navigating change, managing emotions, and why every conversation is a chance to lead. Mastering these essential skills will make you a better leader. So, are you ready to dive in? Let's get started. Welcome to the Deep Leadership Podcast. Today I'm joined by Joel Ellis. After a long career in business leadership roles, Joel has entered in a new chapter of his life where he's helping other leaders through his coaching and speaking programs. His focus is on helping middle managers overcome the typical communication challenges that many leaders face, especially in dealing with change efforts. Now, one of the most important roles that leaders play is in helping leaders navigate the challenges of change. And Joel's an expert in this area, and I'm excited to have him on the show to learn from his experience. So, Joel, welcome to the show.
Thank you, John. It's an honor to be here with you.
Yeah, it is so great to meet you. We had a nice talk before we pressed record. But first of all, tell us about this new chapter in your life. And you've been a speaker your whole life, but now you're entering into sort of the business of speaking. So tell us a little bit about what you're doing and why you're doing it.
I've been around for a while and getting close to a retirement action here. I'm past retirement age already, but I started out in the ministry a long time ago and then shifted to corporate America in about 1988. And as I started contemplating, okay, what am I going to do when I quit coming to this office on a regular basis? I realized that I've been spending most of my time in coaching, leading, developing people, not a lot of management in there, but within the management was a lot of leadership and trying to develop people and help them to gain new things. So I thought, having spoken a lot through my career, I started investigating how to not become a speaker and how to speak, but how to become a speaker in business.
Hmm.
And so it kind of grew out of that over the last couple of years in terms of studying and researching and communicating with my wife about the options. And so that's kind of the trajectory that I'm on.
I think it's great. I mean, I love to hear like experienced business leaders sort of, toward the end of their careers, sort of taking on a role of like really helping others, helping the younger managers or, middle managers with some of the challenges that you
Yeah.
faced throughout your career and sort of helping, grow that. I know in my job, I spend a lot of time mentoring young people, and I enjoy that aspect of leadership is sort of the mentoring side and helping the young managers and young leaders as they're kind of entering their first leadership role, and they're sort of wide-eyed and know what's going to happen if this happens. And so, when you've been doing it for a while, this stuff is old hat, and so it's great to be able to pass that stuff on. So, why in particular are you focused on, like we talked about change management, sort of like a
Mhm.
big challenge that we have as leaders is managing change, leading change. Why have you focused in this particular area? And you talk about this idea of talking for change too. I want to talk about that as well.
Right. Well, for the last several years, I'm a certified project manager, and I've done all the change management stuff. I've never received my certification in change management, but I've studied several different methodologies and been involved in corporate change management programs. And about 2.5 years ago, I came to realize, actually through an interaction with some of my direct reports and my wife, and kind of a at work and a kind of at home situation, to realize that it isn't the big program change management that ultimately is what's important. That is important, but fundamentally it is the interpersonal change management that goes on, and talking is such a key part of that. Now, we're inundated with communication through our technology. I'm a boomer, so in the sense of a baby boomer, not in the sense of your former career, but I deal with with people through 4 generations right now in my workplace. And so the kids that are coming into the workplace that have never known a day of their life without an iPhone in hand have a different perspective on things than I do looking at the Encyclopedia Americana sitting on the floor doing, research back when I was in grammar school. So talking is the common thread. It really doesn't matter what our technology is. If you go back to clay tablets and papyrus and things like that, talking is the thing that we have, and it's unique in a very special way to human beings. Yeah, I'm going to be doing a TEDx in South Africa in a month, and it's on critical thinking, and so the aspect of the human being and being able to do critical thinking to shape our environment for our survival, for the things we want to do, is so dependent upon our communication, being able to express and share and team together for our, executing our critical thinking. So talking is that vehicle that allows us to accomplish change. So I've got a little tagline that I use that may be a little bit corny, but every conversation that two human beings have is a change event. If you just stop and think about that for a minute, we want to change something when we're in conversation. It may be changing the way how I feel, or changing, hey, what did you think about that ball game last night, or changing some deep informational thing, or in the case of business, changing the person's understanding of the assignment that we want them to go complete and
Hmm.
when we want them to complete it. So that's where I came up with the talking for change, in the sense that it's a foundational element to being able to do change management in a programmatic sense, but really it's something that we can each do not only every day of our life, but in every conversation of our life if we stop and pay attention to it.
I really like where you're going here because I think that it sometimes is often missed. And you have a lot of experience with project management, and we spend a lot of time in project management with the schedule and building the schedule and what are the dependents and the independents, and we work really hard on developing a schedule. In fact, I've done that for this project I'm going through at my company as well. So I know kind of what's going to happen this year with the project,
Mhm.
but nothing happens without people, right? And
Right.
so the only way you get people on board with the plan or the program is with conversation and with discussions and with, I would say, dialogue, the back and forth dialogue, so people can deal with the realities of this new direction that we're heading. And I think change in particular is very difficult for people, right? So even when it's good change, we don't like it. We like the old way of doing things, right? Even though
Right.
it's an improved way of doing things, it's like, oh,
Mhm.
I just liked the old way. So even when things get better, we don't like it. We hate change. I mean, is that true that like human beings are sort of negative toward change? We like status quo.
Well, I think there's truth to that because we're comfortable. We like, it's like the baby with the wet diaper. They don't want to be changed because it's comfortable, but they need to be changed. So, but I have found, and I think there's some research out there that shows that really people's resistance to change is not the resistance to the change action. It's resistance in not knowing what that change is about or what
Yeah.
it's into. So
Yeah.
the in a change management context, the more we can inform and shape the information that people have on what that change is going to mean, why, how we're going to do it, what the benefits are, and we message that into that communication and that talking, the less resistance they have. And in fact, some of the change management methodologies are very specific on, identifying your resistors, those that are
Yeah.
going to really hold fast, and over communicate to them using whatever technique you need in order to get that adoption. And really the the home run in the change management communication area is when you get somebody excited about what the change is going to bring.
Mm,
If you can get excitement about what that change is going to bring, you overcome that static inertia that's just holding a person in place with their comfortable, this is what I'm doing.
mm.
And conversation is the most effective tool we have. People aren't going to get that reading a standard operating procedure. They're going to get it because somebody's talking to them and sharing some enthusiasm.
Yeah, it's really interesting. One of the things I had read, and tell me if you found this to be the case too. Like we often tell in change management, we talk about the things that are going to change, and we're telling people about the things that we're going to change. And one of the things I read was it's kind of important to also tell employees or people or your stakeholders, right? Is what's not going to change, what's going to remain the
Oh, yeah.
same as a way of an anchor point so that they feel a little safer, that
Mhm.
okay, I'm going to lose this. Like I'm going to lose my ERP system, which I've been using for 20 years, right? But I'm not going to lose this other system that I'm used to and I've been working with. So, like giving them something to hold on to, an anchor point. Have you ever heard that, or does that make sense?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. It does. I've witnessed it um, in my own career. I'm kind of a change agent. I'm one of those personalities that, like, if we're not getting results, we need to move something. We need to turn the dial or something. And I've had my team learn that they can come back to me and say, "Okay, Joel, slow down on the change because we've got enough on our plate right now." But it is keeping that familiar, and I think that what you described there is exactly the right thing. We're dealing, regardless of what personality type we're dealing with, what professional level, what education level, we're dealing with human beings, and a major part of human beings is emotions.
Mm,
And we may have highly emotional people or very, stoic people and all, but they all have emotions. And we need to, in our messaging, utilize those emotions. So in my program, one of the things that I talk about is just three fundamentals of communication that are talking fundamentals. Assess your audience, broadcast clearly, and then confirm the message. So I have found in working with my direct reports, I need to know where they're at today. Now, I'm real familiar with them, not in the same way you were when you were on a deployment and you're stuck for months on end with the same number of
right.
people. You get to know each other real well.
Oh yeah.
Well, we get to know our direct reports pretty well in work, and we can tell if they're coming in really enthusiastic and real receptive, or if they got up and the dog chewed a hole in the couch and they've got a flat tire on the way to work. They're not in a good frame of mind. So if you assess your audience, if I'm talking to a Gen Z person, I try to use a different vocabulary than I use if I'm talking to a fellow boomer, because what I say may not mean the same thing to a Gen Z person. And I want to be sure that I know where they're at. And then communicate clearly, broadcast clearly. Um, if you got a radio that's an old analog radio and it's just not quite on the station, you get a lot of static, right? And now we understand it as pixelation, on our TVs or something like that if the signal's not clear. But if we're not, as speakers, broadcasting clearly, we're just static. We're just
Mm,
noise. We're interfering with the message. And then if we check with the audience, it may be a single person, it may be a group of managers, but confirm that they understood what you were intending to communicate. So, what was the message in my mind? Did they get it? And them just sitting there nodding their head
uh-huh.
or saying, "Yeah, boss, I got it." Well, that's typically not enough. A few weeks later, you're going to find out they didn't accomplish the job because they missed some critical piece, or you assumed that they already understood something and they didn't. So the simple thing, and they're simple, they're not easy because we tend to neglect and ignore them. But those three simple principles will help us in dealing with our audience and their emotion and where they're coming from, where they're approaching the problem from, And then they're much more receptive to getting to the results that we're trying to achieve and whatever change we're trying to communicate. So I have found those to be pretty important elements.
Well, it's interesting that, what you're saying and what I'm hearing is it's not a one size fits all approach to people, that, and I often say, and I've said it in my books, that the people are messy, right? And,
Oh, yeah.
and they're just different. And then and you mentioned that they deal with change differently, their emotions are different, whether they're stoic or highly emotional with the change. But I think what you said there is that we as leaders have empathy, which is
Yes.
sort of sensing where the emotions are of our employees, sense like you said, the generational differences and the proper way to communication, and then find the right way to have a dialogue with that individual. And it's going to be different for every individual, especially with change, because I think we all react to change differently. And so we have these different personalities first off, and then we all react to change differently. And now you combine that. And so you're not going to have two people in your organization that are going to react the same way to these challenges. So I think what you're saying is we sort of have to have in our dialogue and talking, we need to be very sensitive to the individual. We have to customize our approach to each person. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a real key part to what I define as the difference between leadership and management. Leadership. Now, a lot of times people mush those two together, and I see it like a Venn diagram. There's a lot of overlap, uh, but a leader is somebody that is, taking care of that person that's being led, and taking care of is a big, broad, nebulous thing. But just what you said there is understanding where that person is, understanding their emotion, understanding they're different. And that can be a very fast process. We're not, when we say these things, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's, oh, you take 10 minutes for, a 3-word conversation. It,
Yeah.
it, you get familiar with your people, you get familiar and you learn them, you spend the time to invest in a person, you're gonna pick up on their nuances, their emotions, and all like that, so that even if you've got 10 or 15 direct reports, you'll be able to see that nuance between them and address the ones that have need of help and be able to just reinforce the ones who are able to just take and run with something.
Yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I know one of the things you said is kind of interesting. You mentioned, making sure that it's understood, the message is understood, and I think you're right. Oftentimes, we say something, you get a nod of the head, and you assume that person gets it right. And the truth of the matter is that often they don't, right? And so,
Mhm.
in the Navy, we had this thing called verbatim repeat back. So if I gave an order in the Navy, it was it was repeated back. Like, so you'd say helm, left full rudder, steady course 320. And he'd say left full rudder, steady course 320. Aye, sir. So so he hears it, he repeats it. So, he understood it. And it's come into his head. He's processed it. And then, he's going to act on it. And then what we also do is, the officer deck is you make sure the rudder goes in the right direction and you're turning in the right direction as well. So you verify it afterwards. And so we made less mistakes because of that. Now in the real world, we don't do verbatim repeat back, but it's good. It's often good to say, now in your own words, what do you think that what is your role in this? And so to hear their own words come back is sometimes powerful to make sure that they understood and there isn't any misunderstanding. And I always say that we should check in often to make sure that they are still going in the right direction, especially for a big critical element of our change program as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's where I think, John, that a lot of mistakes are made in corporations and in project work, program work, because these assumptions are made, and assumptions are made that would take just a little bit of extra care, and then you reap the benefits, across the time. And I read something here not too long ago that something like 70% of all projects fail to achieve their goal and scope, schedule, and budget. 70%. That's not a real good success rate.
No.
Now, uh, but a big part of that, and a big part of the project manager's job, and I coach project managers here in my job, and I'm involved in our local project management institute. The big part of the project manager's job is to communicate.
Mm, yeah.
He's like the ringmaster at the three ring circus, pointing and saying, "Okay, over here, look at this. Over, look up at the trapeze. Here's the act you need to be following." And that's the project manager's role. And it's a leader's role as well, even though it may not be on specific assignments like a project manager would be. A leader paying attention to these things about communication and talking for change. I'll go back to that little tagline,
Yeah.
talking for change, thinking about, I am talking, I'm looking for a result. What is that result?
Yeah, yeah, I love that. I love that. So when you're giving talks and when you're working with managers, what are some of the biggest struggles they have, and what do you tend to hear? Where are you helping them the most?
Uh, I really believe that where I'm helping them most is getting out of their own way.
Okay.
Now let me explain that. So getting them to stop to slow down
Mm,
and think. Because managers are typically hyperactive about going and getting the job done because they got a lot to do and more on their plate than they can deal with, and they just want to be able to hand these tasks out. If they'll slow down and take the time to think about these things we were just describing, even if they're just a manager, not really a leader, they're just the person that's looking to execute the job. If they will get out of their own way and help to make sure that they've coached over, the information, communicated over the information, then they'll be more successful. And that's the number one thing I have experienced through a few decades of doing this is if we can just get people to do that. Um,
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, communication is a big part of what we do, and it's really the leader's responsibility to keep everybody informed, so that I often say that when a leader is absent, chaos reigns, and I've seen
mm,
it a lot of times in my career where you had a disengaged boss or a distant boss or one that spent a lot of time in an office with a closed door, and people, even with the best intentions, are trying to accomplish what they think the goals are, and then really good people will disagree on the right approach. And
mhm.
so a lot of times the boss is there, the leader is there to resolve conflicts. Like good people trying to accomplish
Yeah,
the task are going to sometimes get into conflict. And when the leader isn't present or isn't involved or isn't part of driving the change, then those things can really build into some big disagreements, and it can really stall out a project. So I think it's important that the leader be present and involved so that these conflicts don't get out of hand. And so I think communication is a big part of it.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And,
Yeah.
and this is a big problem in our world today with a lot of the workforce being remote. Even though a lot of companies are coming back to in-office work, it's been a big challenge for managers because, I grew up with managing by walking around, walking
Yeah.
around,
Yeah.
touching people, talking to people, and all like that. And currently, I've got probably 60% of my team is remote, either geographically remote or remote out of the office. And it's a totally different dynamic.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, it's been a big challenge for I think leaders to be able to say, how do you be present in a remote work environment?
yes.
I think that's been and some people are doing a better job with it than others. And I think it's been an interesting switch, especially for guys like me who like to be present, right? In terms of
Hmm.
how do you be present when everybody's working from their bedroom or their home office, right? So
Right.
yeah, yeah. But I think you can do it, and it's
Hmm.
those check-ins and these kind of check-ins where you're actually, seeing the person and having a discussion, even if it's remote, you can still have good discussions. I know I ran a research team where half the team was in Mexico and half the team was in America, and I was trying to figure out, like, how do we keep it like one team even though we were two separate geographic areas. And I remember I set up the conference room in both in Mexico and in the US such that the camera was at the end of the table. So it looked like one long table when we were in a meeting. And so we had the TV set up so that it felt like almost like you were in one large table sitting around one table. And so we would have our weekly meetings in all of us at the same table. And even though it was a virtual table, it sort of felt like we were all in it together, And so I would spend half the month down in Mexico and half the month in the US so that they
Mhm.
felt so nobody felt left out, that the boss was on board.
Right.
So some
Yeah.
some weeks I was on the other side of the table and other weeks I was on the other side of the table. So it was like trying to be present, but also in this remote world that we live
Yeah.
in. Yeah. And
Yeah.
so I think that there's ways to do it, I guess
Right.
there's creative ways to do it. So when managers and leaders are using the techniques and the concepts that you teach, how do things change for them?
What I have found here in the last couple of years is I've been trying to, monitor and see some results, and see who's actually practicing what I'm trying to coach them in. They have less rework. If it's like coding assignments, we see less rework coming back. Um, we we see actually increased throughput. So we have a higher velocity of things because there's less questions because they get things communicated better up front. So they personally are getting less stress for the manager. Personally, there's a personal return in that they have less stress because they're not being bombarded with clarification and things being wrong and all like this. And then the company and the customer benefits because, okay, things are going smoother. We've got higher quality. We've got higher velocity. Um, and sometimes it's measured in small increments, but small increments add up. If you've got, 5 minutes gained on a task and you've got 100 tasks, then you've gained, a good bit of time. So those kind of things are what I find, and it's the effect on that manager that's of, I mean, the benefit to the company and everything is good, and it's important, but the effect on the manager and the manager's, I guess, not really self-esteem, but the confidence level, they're feeling like they're doing their job well. They are instilling confidence in their team more. We see more team member respect coming back to them. And those are small things, but they're really important because when you're working in a team, trying to get that team ownership, at the individual level, that buy-in, that adoption of what you're trying to do, you can't browbeat people into that.
Mhm.
You have to lead them to it. You have to convince them through your own actions that it's worth trusting and worth having that confidence.
Yeah, that's so true. So in general, so some people might be listening and say, well, I'm not in project management. I don't really lead change all that much. Change, it's always happening. Uh, why should they understand and make sure that they know how to deal with communicating and talking through change?
Well, I have, as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, I learned some of this from work and some of it from my wife. So my wife and I have been married 48 years now. And one day, about 3 years ago, I went home and she said, we need to sit down and talk. And I found out that there was this big, huge area that I'd been assuming I was doing well and communicating in that, boy, we were on different pages. And we know each other really well. But that was one that I'm still working on, that whole change event there, in terms of getting myself reprogrammed. These principles of communication that we've been talking about and concepts of leadership apply to an individual. They're not just about change management. And that's one of the reasons that I try to articulate. It's not about a change management program. It's about change management at the individual level. And why, talking for change and getting that in our minds that I'm having a conversation. What am I trying to accomplish? And that doesn't mean that you don't talk about silly stuff. When you're joking around, having fun, and just visiting with your friends, but you're doing that for a purpose. You're
Mm.
trying to bring joy to somebody if you're telling them a joke. You're trying to make them laugh. Well, if they're sad and you're trying to make them laugh, that's a change.
Mm.
So, you're ultimately, you can use and benefit this whether you're a manager or not.
Yeah. Okay. That's great. I love that. I love that because I think every conversation, again, you're trying to make a change. And so you might not think you're a change manager, but you are in every conversation. Yeah. I,
Yes.
I love that. That's such a great point. Well, what final message would you like to leave with our listeners?
Oh, I'd just like to remind everybody to realize that thing that talking, every conversation is a change event. And you have a lot of ability and power if you'll pay attention to your audience, assess where they're at, broadcast clearly, give your message clearly for their benefit, and then just make sure they've heard what you're intending to say. Because if they misunderstand you, they're not going to reach the point that you're trying to get them to.
Excellent advice. I love that. Joel, this has been fantastic. You've given us a lot to think about with respect to change and how we talk about it in each one of our conversations, how important it is. I really appreciate that. So, how can our listeners find out more about you and the work that you do?
Okay, well, I've got a website that's out there. It's kind of under a little bit of an overhaul right now. It's Joel Ellis Senior, JoelEllisSR.com. So that's my presence out there. I'm also on LinkedIn and available there. And like I said, at the end of next month, I'm doing TEDx talk, and that'll be posted on the TEDx YouTube channel, sometime shortly after that. So, and they'll have plenty of links to get to things. But JoelEllisSenior.com is kind of my home port.
Well, fantastic. We're going to put links in the show notes for Joel's resources and again, get out there and look at it. And there'll be a posting for the TEDx talk when it happens. And that'll be a powerful talk. And so we'll all look forward to seeing that. So, listeners, look on the show notes. We've got links to Joel's website, his LinkedIn page. Go ahead and follow him. If you've got questions, if something stood out in this conversation, you have questions, reach out to Joel. He's the expert. He's the one you want to talk to, not me. And you can reach out to me if you like to, but reach out to Joel. Tell him you heard him on Deep Leadership. You got some questions, and he'll be happy to answer those questions. But again, really important that what we talked about today, talking for change, such an important topic. Joel, thank you for coming on the show. Thank you for sharing your expertise with our audience today.
Thank you, John. I appreciate you having me.
Thanks again. Well, that is it for today. Thank you for listening to Deep Leadership. If you like this podcast, please subscribe and share so we can continue to build a world with better bosses. Until next time, this is John Rennie saying take care and lead well.